Leah, a young woman stranded at a remote gas station, senses something is wrong when she hears cries coming from the back room. What she discovers sets off a chain of events involving a dangerous human trafficking ring. With her life and the lives of innocent victims on the line, Leah must find a way to stop the traffickers without getting caught herself. Before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. Let's dive in. Leah Parker, a 23-year-old nursing student, sat behind the wheel of her beat-up sedan as it sped along the quiet highway. Her eyes were focused on the endless stretch of road ahead, while her mind wandered back to the hectic week she'd had. The rigors of nursing school had been weighing on her heavily. Clinical rotations, exams, and the emotional burden of caring for patients left her feeling drained. Tonight, she decided to take a spontaneous road trip. It wasn't far, just outside her small town, but the isolation of the road provided the peace she needed to clear her head. The darkening sky cast an orange glow on the horizon as the sun dipped below the mountains in the distance. The air was crisp, the first real sign that fall had arrived. The leaves on the trees lining the highway had started to change, their colors deepening into reds, oranges, and golds. Leah loved this time of year. The transition from the warmth of summer to the cool bite of autumn always felt like a fresh start. She rolled down her window, letting the cool air fill the car as she turned up the volume on her radio. Her favorite song played softly in the background, though she wasn't paying much attention to it. Her thoughts drifted between her responsibilities and the overwhelming pressure she had been feeling lately. But out here, in the solitude of the open road, she could let those thoughts go, even if just for a little while. It was only when she glanced down at her dashboard that her serenity was interrupted. Her fuel gauge was lower than she expected. Much lower. Panic bubbled up in her chest as she realized she hadn't filled up before she left town. She quickly grabbed her phone and opened her GPS, trying to locate the nearest gas station. According to the app, the closest one was 15 miles ahead, further than she was comfortable with, given how low her tank was. Her car was running on fumes, and she wasn't sure it would make it that far. She bit her lip, trying to push down the rising anxiety. Maybe she could make it. Maybe. Leah pressed lightly on the gas, praying she wouldn't end up stranded in the middle of nowhere. She felt a tightness in her chest. This wasn't the adventure she had been hoping for. As the minutes ticked by and the sun disappeared completely, casting the road in a blanket of darkness, Leah's car began to sputter. She pressed her foot harder on the pedal, urging it to keep going, but the engine protested. With one final gasp, the car slowed to a stop, leaving her stranded in the middle of an empty highway with nothing but the dim light of her dashboard to break the darkness. She slammed her hands against the steering wheel in frustration. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. She sat for a moment, her mind racing, before grabbing her phone again to check her surroundings. The gas station wasn't far, maybe 2 or 3 miles away. She could walk it if she had to. The road was quiet, not a single car in sight, but she told herself she had no other option. She wasn't going to sit here waiting for hours on the off chance that someone would drive by. Leah turned off her car, grabbed her backpack, and stepped out into the night. The cool air hit her immediately, making her wish she had brought a warmer jacket. Zipping up the thin hoodie she had on, she began walking along the side of the road, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. She felt small under the vast starry sky, but at least the stars were bright enough to illuminate her path. As Leah walked, she tried to calm her nerves by reminding herself that this was just a minor inconvenience. Soon, she'd be at the gas station, refueled, and on her way. She was always good at handling difficult situations, one of the many skills she had developed during her nursing training. She could handle this too. The gas station's neon lights came into view about 30 minutes later, flickering against the dark backdrop of the surrounding woods. It wasn't much, a small, run-down place with a single pump and a dimly lit convenience store. It looked old, the kind of place that seemed forgotten by time. But Leah didn't care. It was open, and that's all that mattered. Her legs ached from the walk as she crossed the parking lot and pushed open the door to the store. A small bell above the door chimed, announcing her presence. The smell of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener hit her immediately, making her nose wrinkle. She walked up to the counter, where an older man in his 40s stood behind the register, flipping through a magazine. He looked up when she approached, his expression blank and uninterested. "Hi," Leah said, offering a polite smile despite her unease. "My car ran out of gas a couple of miles down the road. Is there any chance you have a gas can I could borrow?" The man looked at her for a moment, his eyes dull and lifeless. He didn't speak right away, and Leah shifted awkwardly on her feet, waiting for him to respond. Finally, he let out a grunt and pointed toward the back of the store. "There's a can in the back," he mumbled. $5. Leah nodded, relieved that the situation seemed to be under control. "Great, thanks," she said, pulling out her wallet. She handed him the money and headed toward the back of the store where he had indicated the gas can was. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man hadn't made eye contact with her once, and the store itself felt unnaturally quiet. It was late, sure, but the atmosphere seemed wrong. It was like the air was thick with tension, but Leah couldn't figure out why. She pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was just tired and anxious from being stranded. All she wanted was to get the gas, fill up her car, and get back on the road. But as she reached the back of the store and spotted the gas can sitting on a shelf, a faint sound caught her attention, something that sent a chill down her spine. It was the sound of muffled voices and crying. Leah froze in place, her hand still hovering over the gas can. The sound of muffled voices was faint, almost too faint to be sure of what she was hearing, but there was no mistaking the soft, rhythmic sobs that followed. Her heartbeat quickened, and a wave of unease washed over her. She wasn't alone in the store, but it wasn't just the clerk at the counter. Someone else was here, someone who didn't want to be heard. Her instinct was to brush it off. Maybe it was a radio playing in a back room, or perhaps someone was watching a movie. But the more she strained to listen, the clearer it became. These weren't casual voices. They were low, urgent whispers. She could almost make out individual words, though they were too garbled to understand fully. The crying, however, was unmistakable, soft, terrified sobbing, like someone was trying to suppress it. Leah's stomach tightened. Her hand trembled slightly as she grabbed the gas can off the shelf. She turned and forced herself to walk back to the front of the store, willing her legs not to move too quickly, even though her instincts screamed at her to get out of there. Whatever was happening in that back room, it wasn't normal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Leah approached the counter again, the sound grating against her already frayed nerves. The clerk, the same disinterested man who had barely acknowledged her before, glanced up. This time, he seemed to study her a little more closely, as if he could sense her discomfort. His eyes darted toward the back of the store, then back to Leah. His jaw clenched, and he shifted on his feet, crossing his arms as though he were trying to block her view of something. Leah's skin prickled. The tension was palpable now, like an invisible weight pressing down on her. She could feel the man's eyes following her every move, and the air in the small store seemed to thicken. Leah wanted nothing more than to leave, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening just behind that cracked door. "Thanks," Leah said, forcing a smile that felt unnatural. Her voice came out tight, and she hoped it didn't betray the growing fear she felt. She carefully set the gas can on the counter to pay, her fingers tapping the plastic nervously. The man grunted in acknowledgement but didn't respond verbally. His eyes flicked back to the door at the rear of the store again, a quick glance that sent a chill up Leah's spine. She followed his gaze for just a moment before turning back to him. Something was definitely off. Trying to remain calm, Leah pulled out her phone and pretended to check her messages, swiping through the screen as if nothing were wrong. But instead of texting, she discreetly opened her phone app and pressed 911, keeping the call active without raising the phone to her ear. The line connected silently, and Leah knew an emergency dispatcher would be listening. The clerk's eyes narrowed as Leah tapped away at her phone. He was growing more agitated. His fingers drummed impatiently on the counter, and Leah could feel the tension in his body language, like a tightly coiled spring ready to snap. She smiled again, hoping to mask her racing heart. "Do you mind if I use the bathroom before I head back out?" she asked casually, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. The man hesitated, clearly not expecting the request. His eyes flickered toward the back room once more, and Leah saw the briefest flash of panic cross his face before he quickly masked it with a shrug. "Restroom's out back," he said, his voice gruff. "It's outside, around the side of the building. We don't have one inside." Leah nodded, pretending to be none the wiser. "Okay, thanks. I'll be quick." She turned toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The cool night air hit her as soon as she stepped outside, but instead of relief, it only heightened her anxiety. The sounds she'd heard inside were still echoing in her mind, and the strange behavior of the clerk made her feel like she was being watched. She took a deep breath, her mind racing through possible scenarios. Maybe it was nothing, just her overactive imagination conjuring up something sinister out of an odd situation. But deep down, Leah knew that wasn't true. The muffled crying, the low voices, and the clerk's strange behavior were all pointing to something much darker. She stepped around the side of the building, feigning a walk to the restroom, but instead of continuing, she stopped at the corner of the building, hidden from view. Her hand shook slightly as she lifted her phone to her ear, making sure the 911 operator was still on the line. Leah whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible. "I think something's wrong. I'm at a gas station about 2 miles off Highway 27. There's a back room. I heard people crying. I think there's something really bad going on here." The dispatcher's voice came through calmly but firmly. "Stay calm, ma'am. We're sending officers to your location right now. Don't confront anyone. Just try to keep yourself safe." Leah's heart raced. She glanced back at the store, her mind whirling. How long would it take for the police to arrive? Minutes? 15, maybe 20 minutes, if they were close? It felt like an eternity. She needed to stall for time, to keep the clerk from suspecting she'd made the call. Steeling herself, Leah took a deep breath and walked back into the store, trying her best to maintain her composure. The man was still behind the counter, eyeing her suspiciously as she approached. "I didn't see the bathroom outside," Leah said with a small apologetic laugh, even though she hadn't bothered to check. "Is it locked or something?" The clerk's eyes narrowed. He was growing more agitated now, his body tense. Leah could sense his frustration building. "You didn't look hard enough," he snapped, his tone suddenly harsh. "Like I said, it's out back." The sharpness in his voice caught Leah off guard, but she forced herself to stay calm. She glanced toward the back of the store where the slightly ajar door still beckoned her curiosity. The voices had gone quiet now, and the only sound in the store was the low hum of the refrigerator unit and the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Leah swallowed hard, her mouth dry. She needed to keep him distracted, just long enough for the police to arrive. "I'll give it another try," she said, pretending to fumble with her keys as if she were about to leave again. But just as she turned to go, the door at the back of the store opened slightly wider, and Leah caught a glimpse of movement. A young girl, barely a teenager, peered out, her eyes wide with fear. She looked disheveled, her hair matted and her face streaked with tears. Leah's heart skipped a beat. There was no mistaking the terror in the girl's eyes. It was a look Leah would never forget. Before the clerk could see the girl, she disappeared back into the room, the door shutting softly behind her. Leah stood frozen in place, her pulse racing as the realization of what she had just witnessed sank in. This wasn't just her imagination. There were people, young girls, being held in that back room, and they were scared. She turned toward the counter, locking eyes with the clerk. He stared back at her, his expression unreadable, but there was a coldness in his gaze now, a chilling awareness that made Leah's blood run cold. Whatever was happening here, Leah was in far deeper than she had ever imagined. Leah's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. The image of the young girl, her tear-streaked face and wide, terrified eyes was burned into her mind. It was one thing to suspect something was wrong, but now she had seen it for herself. She couldn't just walk away. Not now. There were people, children, trapped in that back room, and they needed help. Her heart pounded so loudly in her ears that it nearly drowned out the hum of the gas station's failing neon sign. The clerk was still watching her, his narrowed eyes following her every move. His demeanor had shifted from mild disinterest to something more sinister. There was an edge to the way he stood behind the counter now, his body tense and ready. Leah had to be careful. One wrong move, and he could become violent, or worse, alert whoever was in the back room. Trying to suppress the wave of panic rising inside her, Leah forced herself to breathe slowly. The police were on their way. She had to stall until they arrived. But how long would that take? Each second felt like an eternity, and with the growing hostility in the clerk's demeanor, Leah knew she didn't have much time. "Maybe I'll grab a snack while I wait," she said, her voice sounding more casual than she felt inside. She stepped away from the counter, her movements slow and deliberate, and made her way to one of the aisles, pretending to browse the shelves. She needed to think, and fast. She kept one eye on the door to the back room, knowing that whatever was happening back there wasn't something she could stop on her own. She was outnumbered and unarmed, and any direct confrontation could get her, or worse, the girls inside, hurt. But she had to know more. She needed to gather as much information as possible before the police arrived, so they would have everything they needed to shut this place down for good. From the corner of her eye, Leah could see the clerk shifting uncomfortably behind the counter. His gaze flickered nervously between her and the back room. He was on edge, and Leah wondered how much he actually knew about what was happening here. Was he involved in whatever was going on, or was he just another pawn in a much larger, darker operation? She grabbed a bag of chips off the shelf and walked back toward the counter, her hand trembling as she handed over the crumpled dollar bill she had fished from her pocket. The clerk's eyes lingered on her for a moment too long before he took the money, his fingers brushing against hers in a way that made her skin crawl. As he fumbled with the cash register, Leah's eyes darted toward the door at the back of the store again. The muffled voices had grown quieter now, as though whoever was back there was trying to keep their conversation hidden. But she could still make out fragments of speech, enough to piece together the horrifying reality of what she had stumbled upon. "Transport tonight. Too risky. We need to move them." Leah's breath caught in her throat. They were planning to move the girls. Tonight. She glanced toward the front door, her heart sinking as she saw nothing but the empty parking lot and the dark stretch of road beyond. The police hadn't arrived yet, and Leah had no idea how much time she had left. If they moved the girls before the authorities got here, the traffickers could disappear without a trace, and those girls would be lost forever. Her mind raced. What could she do? She was just one person, and she had no way of stopping them on her own. But she couldn't let those girls be taken. She had to do something, anything, to buy more time. Leah swallowed hard, trying to ignore the cold sweat forming at the back of her neck. She turned her attention back to the clerk, who was now silently staring at her, his face devoid of any expression. He seemed to be waiting for her to leave. Every instinct in her body told her to get out, but her heart wouldn't let her, not until she was sure help was on the way. In that moment, Leah made a split-second decision. She walked slowly toward the back of the store again, this time with more purpose. The clerk's eyes followed her, suspicion darkening his gaze. "Hey," he called out, his voice sharper than before. "I told you, the bathroom's outside." Leah paused, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the clerk's eyes boring into her back, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she looked down at her phone, quickly typing a message to the 911 operator. "Moving girls soon. Hurry." She sent the message and slipped her phone into her pocket, trying to stay calm. "Yeah, I know," she replied, her voice steady. "I just thought I heard something back here. Maybe a stray animal or something?" The clerk's expression hardened. "Ain't nothing back there but storage. Don't go wandering where you don't belong." Leah forced a small, awkward laugh. "Right? Sorry." But she didn't move. Instead, she took a step closer to the door at the back, her heart racing as she tried to stall for more time. The voices behind the door grew louder again, and this time Leah could hear the panic in their tones. They knew the clock was ticking. If they moved too soon, they could risk being caught. But if they waited too long, They could lose their chance to transport the girls without drawing attention. Leah knew she was running out of time too. She could feel the clerk's patience wearing thin, and any moment, he could decide she was more trouble than she was worth. She needed to get out of there before things escalated. But she also couldn't let the girls be moved. If the traffickers took them, it would be like they vanished off the face of the earth. Just then, the sound of a car engine roared in the distance. Leah's heart leapt as she recognized the unmistakable hum of a police siren, faint but growing louder with each passing second. The cavalry was coming, but she wasn't sure how much time she had before the situation exploded. The clerk's head snapped toward the door, his eyes widening with panic as the sirens drew closer. He rushed toward the back, barking orders to whoever was in the other room. Leah could hear the commotion as the men inside scrambled, their voices rising in frantic shouts. "Cops!" one of them hissed. "We've got to get out of here." Leah's pulse raced as she realized the traffickers were making their move. The sirens were still a few minutes away, but the traffickers were already trying to make their escape. She had to stop them somehow, or at least slow them down. Without thinking, Leah bolted toward the front door. The clerk, now in full panic mode, shouted after her, but she didn't stop. She threw open the door, and the cold night air hit her like a shock. In the distance, she could see the flashing lights of the police cars speeding toward the gas station. She ran to the middle of the parking lot, waving her arms wildly, trying to signal the officers. The traffickers had mere seconds to make their move, and Leah knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. The police cars screeched to a halt in front of the store, their doors flying open as officers poured out, guns drawn. Leah dropped to the ground, her heart pounding as the police rushed inside, shouting commands. The next few moments were a blur of chaos. Officers yelling, the sounds of doors being kicked in, and the panicked cries of the men inside. Leah lay there on the cold asphalt, gasping for breath as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She had walked into something far bigger and far more dangerous than she ever could have imagined. Moments later, the police emerged from the store, their faces grim but determined. They had the traffickers in handcuffs, and behind them, the girls, 7 of them, all young and scared, were being led out of the back room. The sight of them, their faces pale and tear-streaked, filled Leah with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. The nightmare was over, but Leah knew that for those girls, the road to recovery was only just beginning. Leah lay on the cold asphalt of the parking lot, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had done it. She had alerted the authorities in time, but the danger was far from over. The traffickers were still inside, desperate and cornered, and Leah knew that desperate people were the most dangerous kind. From her position on the ground, Leah could hear the frantic shouts of the men inside the store. The clerk's cries of panic mixed with the barks of the traffickers, a chaotic chorus of fear and aggression. The air felt thick with tension, as if the whole world had been compressed into this tiny gas station at the edge of nowhere. The sirens were louder now, their wail piercing the night as more police cars screeched into the parking lot. Officers spilled out of their vehicles, guns drawn, and Leah watched in disbelief as they took swift, decisive action. They moved with military precision, their voices booming with authority. "Hands in the air! Everyone on the ground!" one of the officers shouted as they stormed toward the building. For a moment, Leah's body remained glued to the cold ground, the weight of everything she had witnessed pressing down on her. Her mind replayed the faces of the girls trapped inside, their wide eyes, the fear etched into every line of their expressions. And now, the thought that those girls might be freed, that they might have a chance at life again, filled her with a surge of hope. But hope was fragile in moments like this. Leah scrambled to her feet, her legs trembling beneath her as she tried to make sense of the unfolding scene. The flashing lights from the police cruisers illuminated the entire area in harsh bursts of red and blue, casting long shadows over the gas station. The officers were focused, moving in tight formation as they prepared to breach the store. Inside, the traffickers were no doubt in a panic. Leah had seen their faces, menacing and cold, but now likely tinged with fear. They knew they were trapped, but that didn't make them any less dangerous. In fact, Leah knew that cornered animals often lash out the hardest. Suddenly, the door to the gas station slammed open, and a man burst through, one of the traffickers. He was tall, stocky, and his eyes darted wildly, scanning the scene like a predator in search of an escape route. Leah froze, her breath catching in her throat. His hand was gripping something. A weapon? She couldn't tell in the low light, but her instincts told her to stay back. The police were on him in seconds. "Drop your weapon. Hands where we can see them," an officer commanded, his voice booming through the night. For a heart-stopping moment, the man didn't move. Leah's pulse quickened. Her entire body felt like it was vibrating with fear. She had no idea what this man was capable of, but the tension in the air was thick enough to slice through. His eyes darted around, locking on Leah for a brief second before glancing back at the police. Her stomach dropped. For a split second, their eyes met, and Leah saw the cold calculation in his expression. He was weighing his options. Could he escape, or was it all over? Then, with a sudden motion, the man tossed something to the ground. Leah flinched, instinctively raising her arms to shield herself, but no gunfire came. The object clattered to the asphalt, a crowbar. The man slowly raised his hands in surrender, his face twisted into a grimace of defeat. The officers moved in swiftly, handcuffing him and hauling him to his feet. Leah felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was fleeting. There were still more men inside, and she knew they wouldn't all give up so easily. The next few moments passed in a blur. The police surrounded the gas station, securing every exit as they prepared to confront the traffickers inside. Leah stayed back, near one of the police cars, but her eyes were glued to the scene in front of her. She wanted to look away, to distance herself from the danger, but she couldn't. The weight of what she had stumbled upon kept her rooted to the spot. Suddenly, another commotion erupted inside the store. Leah heard shouting, followed by the unmistakable sound of a scuffle. Thuds, the crash of objects hitting the floor. Then the store's door swung open again, and two officers emerged, escorting a man in handcuffs. His face was red with rage, his eyes wild as he struggled against the officers. But it was futile. The police had him secured. Leah's breath hitched as she recognized him. He was one of the men she had seen through the crack in the door earlier, the one who had been barking orders at the girls. His fury was palpable, but Leah felt a strange sense of satisfaction knowing he was caught. He wouldn't be hurting anyone else tonight. More officers moved inside the store, and moments later, they emerged again. This time with the girls. 7 of them, just as Leah had counted. They were young, much younger than she had realized in the dim light of the store. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. They clung to one another as they were led out of the building, their steps hesitant and shaky. Leah's chest tightened as she watched them. These were the girls she had heard crying, the girls whose lives had nearly been stolen by monsters. And now they were free. But the weight of their trauma hung heavy in the air. Leah knew that the nightmare was far from over for them. Their physical escape was just the beginning. Their emotional scars would take much longer to heal. One of the officers approached Leah, his face kind but serious. "Miss Parker? Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Leah nodded, though she wasn't sure if she really was all right. Her body was still shaking, and her mind was racing, but she managed to whisper, "I'm okay." The officer gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You did the right thing. Your call saved those girls' lives. We've been trying to track this operation for months, but we never had enough evidence. You helped us take down something very dangerous." Leah blinked, barely processing his words. She had done it. Somehow, she had made the right call in the most terrifying moment of her life. But the reality of what she had just witnessed still weighed heavily on her, and the adrenaline that had kept her going was starting to fade. Her legs felt weak, and she swayed slightly on her feet. Seeing her unsteady, the officer guided her to a nearby police car where she could sit down. Leah sank into the seat, her hands trembling as she wrapped her arms around herself. The world felt surreal, like she was watching it all unfold from a distance. The flashing lights, the police officers moving with purpose, the girls being led to safety. It was all happening, but it felt like a dream she couldn't quite wake up from. As she sat there, Leah couldn't help but think about how close she had come to being a victim herself. If she hadn't listened to her instincts, if she had simply filled up her gas tank and left, those girls would have been taken. They would have disappeared into the shadows, just like so many others. But now, they had a chance. The police were wrapping up their operation, loading the traffickers into squad cars and gathering statements from the girls. Leah watched, still numb, as the officers worked efficiently to secure the scene. It was over. The nightmare was over. But for Leah, the impact of what she had just experienced was only beginning to sink in. The next morning, Leah woke to the soft light filtering through her curtains, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. For a moment, she lay still in bed, her body heavy with exhaustion, as though her mind was still catching up with everything that had happened. The events at the gas station replayed in her head like a vivid nightmare. Except it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. She had saved them. Leah sat up slowly, her muscles aching from tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. Her mind was still reeling from the flood of emotions that had hit her after the rescue. Shock, relief, fear, pride. They all swirled inside her, leaving her feeling unsteady and overwhelmed. She had never imagined that stopping for gas could lead to something so life-altering. As she swung her legs over the edge of the bed and stood, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Officer Ramirez, the kind-faced officer who had helped her at the scene. She opened the message with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Officer Ramirez. Leah, I just wanted to check in. The girls you helped rescue are safe now. They're receiving care and support, and their families have been contacted. We'll keep you updated on the investigation, but I wanted you to know how much of a difference you made. Thank you again for your bravery. Leah let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The girls were safe. That was what mattered most. She couldn't help but think of their faces as they were led out of the gas station, so young, so scared, their eyes haunted by what they had endured. Knowing they were in safe hands now brought her some comfort, but the weight of their trauma lingered in her mind. How would they ever heal from something like that? Setting her phone down, Leah walked to the window and gazed outside at the quiet neighborhood. It felt surreal, almost disorienting that the world could seem so peaceful after the chaos she had witnessed. People were walking their dogs, children playing in yards, and the sun shone brightly on a crisp autumn morning. Everything looked normal, but Leah knew that beneath the surface there was a darkness she hadn't fully understood until last night. The human trafficking operation she had uncovered wasn't an isolated incident. It was a glimpse into a hidden, horrifying reality, one that many people were oblivious to. How many others had been taken? How many more were still out there, waiting for someone to notice, to care enough to help? A soft knock on her apartment door pulled Leah from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone, but she had a feeling it might be someone from the police department. She opened the door to find Officer Ramirez standing there, a warm, reassuring smile on his face. "Good morning, Leah," he said gently, noticing the tiredness in her eyes. "I hope I'm not intruding." Leah shook her head and opened the door wider. "No, not at all. Please, come in." Ramirez stepped inside, his expression kind but serious. He gestured toward the couch and they both sat down. "I just wanted to check in with you, see how you're holding up." Leah sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know," she admitted, her voice shaky. "It all happened so fast. One moment I was just stopping for gas, and the next, I was calling the police about something I never thought I'd see in real life." Ramirez nodded. "What you went through is a lot for anyone to process. It's completely normal to feel overwhelmed. What you did last night took a lot of courage, Leah. You not only helped rescue those girls, but you also exposed a major trafficking ring that's been under investigation for months. The authorities had their eyes on that gas station, but we didn't have enough to act until you made that call." Leah's eyes widened. "You were watching the gas station?" Ramirez leaned forward, his expression serious. "We had suspicions. It's part of a larger network, but we were missing key pieces of information. Your actions provided the evidence we needed. The men we arrested are part of a much bigger operation. We're working to dismantle the entire ring." Leah felt a mixture of relief and horror. She had stumbled into something far bigger than she had realized. I couldn't leave those girls," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "When I saw them, I knew I couldn't just walk away." Ramirez gave her a reassuring nod. "And because of you, they have a chance at a future now. What you did mattered." Leah bit her lip, the emotions catching in her throat. "What happens to them now? The girls? They're being taken care of," Ramirez said. "They're with social workers and trauma counselors. Some of them are being reunited with their families, but it's going to be a long road to recovery for all of them. It's not easy to come back from something like this, but they're safe now. That's the first step." Leah nodded, her heart aching for the girls. She could only imagine the horrors they had endured. And she knew that while the rescue was a huge victory, it was only the beginning of their healing journey. "Thank you for letting me know," Leah said softly. I can't stop thinking about them." Ramirez smiled kindly. "That's understandable, but you should also take care of yourself, Leah. You've been through a traumatic experience too, and it's important that you don't ignore your own well-being." Leah nodded, though she wasn't sure how to process everything just yet. She had never thought of herself as someone who could handle a situation like this, but somehow she had. And now, she wasn't the same person who had set out on that quiet drive the night before. After Ramirez left, Leah spent the rest of the day in a strange haze. She went through the motions, making coffee, answering emails, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the girls, heard their muffled cries, and felt the suffocating tension of the gas station. She had acted in the moment, but now the weight of it all was catching up to her. That evening she decided to take a walk to clear her head. The crisp air felt refreshing against her skin as she wandered through the quiet streets of her neighborhood. The trees, their leaves now a vibrant array of orange and gold, swayed gently in the breeze, and for a moment Leah let herself get lost in the beauty of it. As she walked, she thought about her future. She had always been driven to help others, which was why she had pursued nursing in the first place. But now, after what she had experienced, she felt a new sense of purpose. She had witnessed firsthand the horrors that could happen when people turned a blind eye, and she had also seen the impact of stepping up and taking action. Maybe there was more she could do, beyond nursing, beyond the hospital walls. Leah didn't know exactly what that would look like yet, but the idea was starting to form in the back of her mind. She had been given an opportunity to help those girls, and she wasn't going to let that chance slip away. A few weeks later, Leah attended a community event organized by local authorities and anti-trafficking organizations. The event was a gathering of survivors, advocates, and those who had played a role in the rescue. Leah was invited as a guest of honor, though she still found it strange to think of herself as a hero. At the event, Leah listened to survivors share their stories of survival, resilience, and hope. The girls she had helped rescue were there too, though they remained quiet, still too traumatized to speak. But seeing them surrounded by support and love, Leah felt a sense of peace. They had a long road ahead, but they had a chance now, and that was everything. By the end of the night, as she stood outside the event hall, gazing up at the stars, Leah knew one thing for certain: her life had changed. She had changed. The experience had given her a renewed sense of purpose, a fire inside her that she couldn't ignore. She had been part of something life-changing, and she wasn't done yet. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.